Welcome to the You at Your Best podcast. I'm your host, Morgan. Before we get into the episode, let me give a little bit of an introduction for anyone who's new. If you like listening to someone process life in real time, or you are neurodivergent, an overthinker, a perfectionist, or maybe feel things deeply, this is the podcast for you. This is a non-professional, very human podcast about choosing authenticity over performance. My goal is to remind you to always come back to yourself. I talk about very deep things. I don't avoid vulnerability, but I trust you to know what resonates, what feels safe, and what might be too much for you right now. And I also share a journal prompt at the end of every single episode to help you think. So join me if you want to create a life that actually feels like you, so that you can become you at your best. All right, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. Hello, I hope you're doing well. This week's episode is going to be about chronic exhaustion, but before we get into the episode, I didn't upload an episode last week, mostly because of the chronic exhaustion that I've been dealing with, but also because I wanted to give myself some time to really work on this episode. I have spent a lot of time on this episode. I have put a lot of work into making this episode really well. I recorded it in a moment of pure exhaustion, and I was spiraling in the middle of recording the episode, and I didn't want to leave it at that. So I've made a lot of cuts to this episode to keep the emotions but make it less doom, I guess, which is where my brain can sometimes naturally go. But I want to explain the episode a little bit before we get into it. So this episode was recorded during a moment of realization for me. I realized that I was finally hitting a breaking point after years of pushing through emotional pain, and that my old way of coping isn't sustainable anymore. Basically, this episode is about burnout from being the kind of person who never stops trying. This one is pretty heavy. Like I said, I recorded it in the middle of a spiral before I fully understood what was happening. So what you're hearing is edited versions of me processing in real time from a place that isn't fully grounded, but it does get better. I'm sharing it because I think there's value in hearing what this actually sounds like, but I don't want to leave you there. So when things get really dark, just know that I'm not expressing it to stay stuck. I'm expressing it to help myself move through it. Something that a lot of us really struggle to do and are really scared to do, but is completely necessary in the healing process, is letting ourselves feel and express those emotions that we're so terrified of, so scared to admit to. This episode shows a part of my process that a lot of the time I never share, the part where I'm actively in the process. I usually wait until I've processed things, at least mostly, then I talk about it after. But with the direction I'm wanting to take this podcast, I'm focusing less on perfection and more on deeper vulnerability. And this felt like one of those moments that I needed to share while still being intentional about it, while still being intentional about how I'm holding space for my audience, if that makes sense. This episode does come to a more hopeful place in the end. And then next week's episode will be me sharing a second part where I talk about what this experience taught me and how I'm starting to move through it. As always, please take what feels safe for you. Feel free to pause if anything feels like too much. Also, and just like a quick heads up, there is a good amount of edited in parts for clarity. So if the tone shifts a little in certain moments, that's why. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the episode. I really hope you enjoy it. I am recording this episode right after I just got done crying very hard, and I had this really healing but also really hard moment of realization, and I just wanted to record this episode because it feels like the right thing to do. And I've realized that I'm kind of stuck in a healing crisis, which is basically what happens whenever things temporarily get 10 times worse before they start to finally get better. And I realized that in order for things to finally get better for me, I need to sit down and actually talk about this. This is something that I've been avoiding talking about. This is something that I shut down about, have huge meltdowns about quite often. And I don't talk about it very often, but I think the reason I've been avoiding it is because I didn't fully understand what was actually going on. Basically what it is chronic exhaustion, and I don't think I even realized how bad it had gotten. I started trying to understand why I feel like this, and I kind of went down a little spiral trying to figure it out, but then something finally clicked. I think I've been pushing through a level of exhaustion that I don't even fully realize is happening anymore. I've gotten so used to it that it just feels normal now. And I think what I started to realize is I've experienced so much emotional pain over time that it doesn't even register the same way anymore. It just feels normal now. And when I realized that, it was kind of weirdly validating, because I think a lot of my pain has always been really quiet. Like, it's not always been obvious. It's not always something that other people can see. So it's easy for that to get dismissed or overlooked, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. And I think that's part of why I'm so exhausted. Whenever you have that kind of pain, people kind of disregard you or think that you're being dramatic, even when it's actually real, and it sucks. Because it's not just that I'm tired, it's that I don't even know how to rest. Letting myself rest hurts so much because I have to work so hard on everything. My brain is always thinking of something else that I could be doing better. I go down these spirals, but I'm starting to realize that even me noticing that I'm going down these spirals is proof that I'm healing. And here lately I've been focusing on trying to do better for myself. Like in last week's episode, I talked about trying to be more present and trying to rest. And I have been focusing on that, but it doesn't feel like I'm allowing myself to rest. It feels more like I'm forcing myself to do something that's extremely painful. Sometimes it feels so uncomfortable that I'd literally rather do anything else, and then I'll start to feel a little bit better, like maybe I can actually enjoy life for a second. And that's when my brain starts creeping in. You're a bad person, you're going to hurt people, you're not doing anything right, you're a bad mom, you're not good enough. It feels like someone who hates me is whispering in my ear, slowly making me hate myself too. And if you've ever experienced that, you know how real it can feel, even whenever it's not actually true. And because of that, I feel like I can't rest, because when you're this exhausted and when your brain won't let you stop, it feels like you're not allowed to slow down until you figured everything out. And I started noticing this pattern in my brain where I'll have this thought that I'm a bad person, and then I feel like I have to do everything I can to prove that I'm not. And it's exhausting because it doesn't stick. I can get to a place where I feel okay, where I feel like I've proven it wrong, and then it just comes back again, over and over again. And my brain won't let me rest until it feels certain, and it never feels certain. It just finds something new to question. So even when nothing is wrong, it still feels like something is wrong. I've also realized that a lot of this goes back to how I grew up. I've struggled with stress and anxiety my entire life. Ever since I was a kid, I had panic attacks, and I, at one point, started grinding my teeth, and I started experiencing like migraines and jaw tension, and I've had like jaw tension and migraines all throughout my life, and panic attacks all throughout my life, because I was so scared and so anxious all the time. And whenever that happened, I also felt like a burden for my body's exact reactions to stress and anxiety. So I felt like a burden whenever I would grind my teeth because I was annoying my family, or I felt like a burden whenever I would have panic attacks. So because of that, I started becoming numb instead, which contributed to the exhaustion, because whenever you become numb to your emotions, they build up, but you don't feel them. And it eventually gets to a point where you can't experience life without being incredibly burnt out. And I think that's also why the things that have affected me the most haven't always been big, obvious moments. It's been the smaller things that happened over and over again, like feeling anxious all the time, or feeling like I was too much, or like I had to shut parts of myself down. Those are the things that really stayed with me throughout my life. And over time, they just kind of build up in a way that I didn't fully realize until now. And that is where growing up in my family starts to show up. In my family, everyone was struggling in their own way. And because of that, there wasn't really space for anyone to fully be taken care of. I wasn't abused or anything like that, but I was definitely neglected as a child. So I became someone who takes care of myself and everyone else. And I think sometimes I end up respecting other people while unintentionally disrespecting myself, because I learned very early on that in order to feel safe, I had to push myself aside. I have spent a lot of time on this podcast trying to be as respectful to my family as I can, because I care so deeply about them and I know how much they have struggled. And I still want to approach those relationships carefully and approach how I speak about my family on my podcast carefully. But I also don't want to hold back from sharing my experience just because I'm scared that someone might be upset with me. Fast forward to now, all of this shows up in motherhood and with my boyfriend. I care very deeply about being a good mom, but I also care very deeply about my podcast and my own inner world and my own alone time. And my brain decides that I have to have one or the other or I'm bad. So sometimes whenever I am spending a lot of time taking care of myself and loving myself, my brain creeps these thoughts into my mind saying I'm focusing too much on myself, and because of that, I am neglecting my daughter. With my boyfriend, that same thing happens where I have to take care of myself first. I have to translate what's going on in my head before he fully understands what's going on. And for me, that becomes hard whenever I'm already so exhausted to begin with. Quite often at night, I get to a place where I can't speak because I'm so overwhelmed. And I can talk, I can force myself to, but it just makes me even more exhausted. And I think I've been feeling this in my body for a while now. I've been waking up exhausted, even whenever I'm rested, even whenever I've gotten a full 8 hours of sleep. It feels like no matter how much sleep I get, I'm always so tired. And I didn't really understand why. I thought like maybe I was just tired or maybe I was sick. I was so confused. But what I'm starting to realize is that this is what happens whenever we have been pushing ourselves for too long. It's like my body is finally hitting a breaking point and it's just not letting me keep going in the same way. Like I don't think I can keep living like this anymore. And I think that's where the change has to start. It hurts a lot, but I can feel it affecting how I show up in my life, even in small ways. And this is where hope finally shows up for me, because I know that I can make a change. And I'm not saying that any of it is going to be easy, because it's not. It's hard. But I think what's getting me through this right now is knowing that I have felt something different before. I've experienced what it feels like to be truly connected to myself through this podcast, through being a mom, through moments in my life where I'm actually present. And I think what I'm starting to realize is the depth that I feel things at doesn't only apply to pain, it also applies to joy and connection and meaning. So even though this is really hard, I don't think it's for nothing. I think it's leading me somewhere. I just don't fully know where yet, but I can feel that something is shifting. Since I am someone who experiences pain on a really deep level, I experience hurt on a really deep level, I feel everything deeply. I can also experience joy on such a heightened level, and I'm realizing that a lot of my life experiences are leading me to a life that's truly meant for me, a life where I will truly be happy. And that's where I find hope, because I feel like I struggle with that a lot. I can sometimes be really negative, really pessimistic, but at the same time, my brain naturally tries to find the good in things and tries to find the hope in things, because I don't ever want to stay stuck. I truly want to live a fulfilling life. I always have. And that's where all of this is leading me. And I remember reading something that really stuck with me. It basically said that healing for people like me isn't about working harder. It's about unlearning the belief that I have to earn the right to exist, or like my rest has to be earned. And that actually hit me really hard, because I've spent so much of my life trying to prove that I'm good, trying to prove that I'm doing enough, that I never really let myself just be. And I think that's a huge part of why I'm so exhausted. It also talked about how this kind of burnout, this level of exhaustion, it usually happens right before a shift, like a transition from surviving to actually learning how to live, like I just talked about. And I think that's where I am right now. It doesn't feel good. It feels really uncomfortable, but it also feels really important. This moment really matters, despite how scary it is. I think something that I'm starting to slowly understand is that this level of exhaustion isn't really random, and it's not me failing. It's not me doing something wrong. It's what happens when you've been pushing yourself for a really long time without really knowing how to stop. And I think my body is finally at a point where it's like, we can't keep on like this. And as hard as that is, I also think, like I said, that means that something is shifting, because for the first time, I'm not trying to push through it in the same way that I always have. I'm actually starting to listen to my body and listen to what it needs. I don't fully understand what it needs. I don't really fully understand what that looks like yet. I don't know everything. I don't have everything figured out, but I do feel like I'm at the beginning of something different, something that might actually be sustainable, so that I can work towards my goals and do things that I genuinely and truly love, while also taking care of myself so that I don't become severely burnt out and then end up ghosting my podcast, or becoming a mom that I don't want to be, or living a life that feels exhausting and I feel like I'm just surviving it. So if you're in a place like this too, where you feel exhausted or stuck, or like you've been trying for so long and nothing is working the way that it used to, I just want you to know that it doesn't mean you're broken. It's not a moral failure. It might just mean that the way you've been surviving isn't meant to be the way that you keep on living from now on. And again, that's really uncomfortable, but it can also be the start of something better. And that's where I'm going to end this episode, on some hope, because like a lot of my Inside episodes, it can get really dark and it can get really difficult, and it can be really hard to stay in that place and to process those emotions whenever we're scared that we're not going to ever get out. Next week's episode will be the Insight episode related to this reflection. In that episode, I'm going to talk about things that I'm actually doing right now to move through this. And I've actually already planned that episode, because I'm recording this outro way after I recorded the original episode. So the way that I share it, all the things that I share, they are very hyper specific, but I feel like that's very needed. Whenever it's this type of chronic exhaustion, it kind of has to be specific. It can't just be like universal advice that will help everyone. It's advice that people that are in this specific situation need. And I'm going to be sharing all of those things, not in a perfect way, just in a real, honest, this is what is helping me right now kind of way, because I don't want to leave this here. I don't want to just talk about the exhaustion. I want to talk about what comes after the exhaustion, what comes after understanding the exhaustion. Because for me, I think I'm finally learning that rest isn't something that I have to earn. It's something that I have always needed. Okay, and that's all for the episode. For this week's journal prompt, Ask yourself, if I didn't have to earn my rest, what would I allow myself to do? Okay, that's all for today. If something in this episode resonated, share it with a friend who needs a little reminder that they're not alone. If you want more conversations like these, be sure to follow and rate this podcast. Downloading this episode is one of the best ways to help this podcast grow, so be sure to do that. If you want to find me on social media, all of my links are in my link tree in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next Sunday.